Motorists in Gauteng will have to continue paying for e-tolls until a legal agreement has been finalised on alternative ways to collect revenue. The provincial government has until the end of the year to find the long-term methods. Let's talk about the latest situation now about the e-toll debt with Wayne Duvenage from Outa, an organisation that at its genesis, Wayne, focused predominantly, or mainly in fact at the time as I recall, on fighting e-tolls. So it is a system that's going away, we're told, but not gone quite yet.
Yeah, it's very confusing, isn't it? When the Minister of Finance indicates in his midterm budget policy statement that they will be funding the GFIP debt through Treasury allocations, so that is the alternative funding mechanism to e-tolls. But then they say, 70% will come from them, 30% from Gauteng province. Gauteng province is asking questions as late as Friday on, well, how much are we talking about and where's this money going to come from? So it's very ill-planned. And then you want the motorists, the last 15% or so, to carry on paying. Well, that's not going to happen, and there's nothing they can do about the fact that 85% aren't paying. So it really is confusing and crazy to come with these statements when it's just really not going to happen. And I imagine their compliance levels have dropped below 15%. Anybody paying e-tolls right now and against this backdrop would be wasting their money as far as we're concerned.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it matters not, right, at this point, whether that gazette comes through tomorrow or on New Year's Eve?
Exactly. It matters not at all because, as we've been saying for the last 10 years, if you cannot enforce your laws, you suffer a crisis of legitimacy. You need to make alternatives. And on top of that, the scheme has not worked. It's been proven, the reasons why many factors, not just one. This is not just a flippant civil disobedience campaign. These roads were subjected to massive corruption in the construction costs. Even the ETC contract that was won at 6.2 billion rand, the contract was actually signed at 9.9 billion. There's so much that the public have a right to fight. They were winning this fight, and Sanral even pulled back on summonsing. So you cannot receive a credit rating downgrade, you cannot have your licenses withheld, and they've stopped summonsing. That was their last resort. So on what basis are they asking the public to keep paying for a scheme that has failed dismally from day one?
But is it possible, Wayne, still that e-tolls could emerge in another way? Because as things stand, there's still phase 2 to come through, and other parts of the country had also at some point been flirting with the idea of maybe going the same way that Gauteng did, disastrously as we've seen in the last 10 years.
No, I think it's very clear that the e-tolling mechanism has been thrown out. Even Sanral have said, and they lost in court in Cape Town trying to introduce the same scheme there. And there's a difference between road upgrades, so this is infrastructure that needs to be built, and the methods of funding. When you have a boom down tolling plaza that doesn't lift until you pay, you have a 100% hit rate. When you're on a congested freeway, you can't introduce toll down boom plazas because it just makes the congestion even worse. And you introduce an electronic scheme that says you can drive now but pay later, and then you have to chase the money. And you can't chase the money, then that scheme is dead in the water. So I don't think any city in this country, because it relies on a very efficient NATIS system, a vehicle registry system, it relies on an efficient post office, and it relies on absolute buy-in by the public. That's when those schemes work in many parts of the world. So with none of those boxes ticked, e-tolling is not the funding mechanism. So how are we going to introduce the additional phases in Gauteng? Well, that is for the Gauteng province, the cities that are involved and national to sit down and find the most effective way to finance these upgrades. It's certainly not through a scheme that costs R1 billion a year before R1 goes into the tarmac, and then you still can't collect the money. That was the most absurd decision, and they've realized that now. So we need to get the money. But this is about road financing decisions that are in the best interest of the public. E-tolls was the worst decision they could have implemented.
It was interesting on Friday, was it not, to hear that briefing by the Gauteng Premier, who it appeared at that point knew just about as little as the public about how this 40 billion rand plus debt would then be split and who would pay for what. And as things stand, from what we know from the statement from Treasury, is that debt, do you think, being addressed or settled in the best way possible? Is it a fair deal for all involved?
Well, no, we're saying it's not, and we'll be engaging with Panyaza Lesufi on this, and the pieces we're writing are asking some big questions. First of all, in court in 2012, SANRAL posed the number of the 20 billion rand debt ring-fenced because they wanted Gauteng motorists to pay for it through this ETOL scheme. So it was 20 billion rand, which, by the way, is a lot more than they should have got because the road construction collusion was massive and corruption was allowed to happen under SANRAL's watch. But park that, 20 billion rand in 2012 was what they went to the courts with as the ring-fenced debt for GFIP, the Gauteng Free Improvement Project, Phase 1. In the meantime, because the ETOL scheme is meeting resistance and they can't launch on time, Treasury starts funding SANRAL for the Gauteng Freeway debt from 2012. Between that time and 2022, SANRAL has received 22.4 billion rand for the Gauteng debt alone from government, from Treasury. So we've got to ask ourselves, if you've received, if it was a 20 billion rand bond you took out and you've already received 22.4 billion from Treasury, well, how do you arrive at a 43 billion rand debt for GFIP, of which you want Gauteng to pick up 30%? There's so little transparency and so little clarity around this actual debt and how much is still outstanding that Gauteng has the right to ask for clarity and not agree to 30% because they don't know what they're agreeing to. And then how they're going to get that money is the next question.
What impact then would it have on any hopes by the Gauteng government and national to continue to collect at least a bit of the ETOL debt? Because we know the majority of motorists in Gauteng have simply refused to comply. I mean, I know there was a time when this was all starting that companies basically got e-tags for their fleets.
So many of them have abandoned that over the years when they saw that there were a few that were not they were complying and they were being uncompetitive. So as we've said, it's about 85% stopped paying. The best they got to was 60%, 40% compliance in June 2014, but it declined then. So what you've got to understand now is the little they're collecting, even before these announcements were made, at 15% or 17%, as SANRAL says, whichever one it is, they were collecting between 50 and 60 million rand a month. Do you know that none of that was going towards servicing the debt? All of that money was going towards the collection process. So it's crazy to think, well, we're going to spend 60 million to collect 60 million. It just doesn't make sense. If nothing's going to settle the debt, stop collecting it because they're wasting their time.
Wayne, Duvenage, always good to speak to you. Thank you.